So, well, thanks for everybody for attending today. I know it's early in the morning, and I know one of our guests it's evening time in San Francisco. So thanks very much. Very excited to host the panel today. Talk all about things recruitment, HR, office culture, future of work, and hear some stories from some of our leading sort of technology founders here in Australia. So we're really lucky to welcome the three of our portfolio companies today, and just how they're navigating through this current environment, and how their clients are navigating through the general economic sort of outlook. So as a quick intro, my name is Stu Glynn. I'm a partner at Transition Level Investments and our recently launched investment syndicate platform 1013. So we're bringing more capital to early stage companies, in Australia and around the world. If you would love to, if you could follow us, on 1013 on LinkedIn and 1013 _ on Twitter, and also the guys at GO1, InsideSherpa, and Vervoe on all of their socials. So welcome, folks. As a quick intro, I'll just do a quick whip, and I might ask the guys just do an introduction of themselves and their business. But we've got Tom Brunskill, a reformed lawyer who's setting out to change the way graduates are recruited at InsideSherpa. So Tom, if you could just give us a minute on yourself and the business, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on the panel, Stu, and the TLI team. I'm obviously Tom. I'm one of the two founders of InsideSherpa. I'm based in San Francisco here in California, which is an interesting place to be right at the minute. What we do at InsideSherpa is we partner with large companies, so companies such as BCG, KPMG, Deloitte, JP Morgan, to create free open access online training courses for college students to build practical skills and confidence. So we run programs all around the world, in Asia, in Australia, here in the US, and the UK, and we're about to launch our first programs in Germany, Poland, and Russia. That's who I am, and that's what we do.
Thanks, Tom. Next up, we've got Omer Molad, who's an ex-Israeli tank commander and NAB sort of corporate finance guru, and then now he's setting out to kill the CV with Vervoe. So, Omer, over to you.
Thanks, Stu. So I'm Omer, co-founder and CEO of Vervoe. I'm one of two founders. David Weinberg's the other founder, and Vervoe is a skills assessment platform. And what we do is we help companies figure out who can do the job and make hiring decisions based on how people perform tasks rather than what they look like on paper. And we help companies of all sizes all around the world. You'll know a lot of them in Australia, companies from Australia Post to Medibank, RMIT, MYOB, etc., and large companies in the US, from Walmart to TriNet to sort of a lot of other names. And we work predominantly with corporates, but staffing firms as well. And essentially what they do is they deploy our skills assessments, which are essentially on short, or sometimes can be longer, online tests that candidates do in their own time. And then we use machine learning to automatically grade them. So we've sort of replaced the whole resume phone screening and most of the interviewing, and help companies make decisions based on seeing how candidates do tasks that are relevant to the job. Thank you.
Awesome. And then the last guest that we have is Vu Tran, who's a medical doctor on the weekends, and also sort of head of sales and lots of BD at GO1, so making corporate training as easy as Netflix. So Vu, love to hear from you.
Thanks for having me, Stu, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. As Stu said, my name is Vu. I'm one of the co-founders of GO1. I've got a very privileged job. I get to run this company with my best mates, so it's not really work when you look at it that way. So the best way to be able to describe GO1, if I put it in a nutshell, is think of us as your Spotify or Netflix for learning, but for workplace learning. We aggregate tens of thousands of courses from training providers all over the world under a single subscription for companies from Australia's largest banks all the way through to Delta Airlines in the US, through to SMEs here in Australia. So to give you a bit of context, every 1.3 seconds, someone in the world is finishing a GO1 course. So during the course of this chat today, we'll probably have 1,000 to 2,000 people finish some form of training through GO1. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
Really, really good. Thanks, guys. So yeah, I think like the topics that we're probably going to look to cover is the first half is probably more macro questions, just in general about the market, future of work, HR, and how recruitment is changing. So more industry focused. And then the second half, we'll probably talk a little bit about particular, company examples of how the team or, the guys on the call are actually managing, their own businesses and trying to steer the ship. So at a high level, guys, I guess like pretty interesting times that we're in, obviously. So how have your companies been coping the last 3 months? We might kick off with Vu, since you were the last to lead off. So been pretty interesting times. How's it going?
Look, I'm going to throw a whole bunch of cliches at you all today, so forgive me in advance, but it's a roller coaster ride. We've had some amazing things happen during the last 3 months that are and aren't related to what's been happening with COVID. We've seen a significant uptick in what we do, given the nature of what all three of us do in terms of being able to do things remotely and online. But I think as a business leader and as a manager, it's been trying to adapt to a significant amount of change. I'm sitting in an office right now. No, this is not my living room, where we have 600 to 700 square meters, where normally we have about 100 people coming through here, right? Today, there is probably 3 of us, and actually, 3 of the 4 co-founders are in the office today. So at the end of the day, it's been about adapting to change. For myself personally, it's been about learning, how do we deal with having such a large team that is remote? But we've been very fortunate because things like having Zoom set up, every single person with a Zoom account, the fact that every single meeting room in all our offices all over the world are Zoom rooms, means that, we were pretty well geared for remote working. But despite that, I think we've fallen in the same box as everyone else, instead of in terms of still having challenges and dealing with things. As a business, online learning is booming at the moment. It was growing substantially before COVID-19. And I view what's happened with COVID-19 as just an accelerator of a lot of what's been happening as well. Really good. I don't know if Tom or Omer, if you would want to comment at all on how things have been going.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of what Vu just said. I guess we're in an incredibly fortunate position, and I assume the same is with the other companies, that we've seen like a significant uptick in demand for what we do, both for our particular business, both on the student side and the company side. So, I mean, companies, particularly in the US, where companies historically have been addicted to physical campus recruitment, that obviously logistically is now impossible. So we've exactly what Vu just said there. Like, we see that the world has like been moving towards like the digitization of like recruitment operations, but we've just seen that come into sharp focus obviously over the last couple of months. But then on the student side as well, we've seen that students that typically are facing like unprecedented like career uncertainty, are having like internships cancelled en masse, are not having access to the usual type of work experience opportunities that traditionally would exist. And so on the student side as well, and I can go into details later, we're seeing just exponential growth in the number of students who are kind of engaging in our courses. So we're a small team. We're only a team of like 15 people. So just kind of keeping up with that demand has been certainly challenging for our team.
Yeah, no, really good. Just before we continue, I'll just say to any of the folks online, if you want to ask questions, please just enter them in, and we'll have a question sort of session towards the back end of the call. Omer, I might dive into another one there. So like there's been quite big shifts in the way corporates are looking at hiring and thinking sort of differently about recruitment. So can you share some insight into like the recent trends that you're kind of seeing with Vervoe and how corporates are adapting during this time?
Yeah, so when the pandemic started, 3 things happened all at the same time. So hiring volumes halved. So about 50% of companies froze hiring, and you can sort of see evidence of that with the job ad volumes on Seek and other job boards. Basically, initially went down 60-70% and then sort of started coming back a little bit. The second thing is unemployment started doubling and tripling depending on the depending on the location. So what we started seeing was that the average number of applicants per job skyrocketed. we're talking about increases of 3 to 4 to 5x, not 10 or 20%. So you've got half the companies hiring, but the companies who are hiring have many, many more applicants. And it's not just for the roles that are traditionally high volume, it's for every role. And so now, you know, they don't really know how to handle that. They're used to, a lot of these companies, particularly in the harder to fill roles, like in the Valley, if you're hiring engineers or sales reps, you're having to focus, previously you had to focus on candidate attraction, and now you've got too many candidates. And then the third thing is, and the guys touched on this, that anything that had to do with the required physical proximity, like conducting assessment centers or doing on-site interviews, that's no longer possible. And so now companies have experienced disruption to the traditional hiring process. And what that's done is it's forced them to think differently. And while some of them have initially just looked for sort of a band-aid, you know, a replacement, like, well, let's do it on Zoom, it's really opened their eyes to other methods and to sort of thinking differently about, well, if I'm going to change the way that I go about hiring, maybe I'll think more broadly about my hiring process, not just the medium itself. And that's resulted in a lot of demand for our solution, a lot of conversations, and I guess the opportunity to challenge, you know, well, if you're going to change something, maybe change more broadly and do hiring in a way that's not just digital, but also more predictive of performance. So it's been an interesting time. Normally these kind of shifts, you know, to get sort of, to cross the chasm, to use a startup term, so to get that sort of early majority to start thinking differently, it normally takes years or decades, and we've seen it happen in, like, you know, 6 weeks. So it's been extraordinary.
Stu, can I just add to that, if that's all right?
Yeah,
you know, Omer, you've hit the nail on the head there. One of the things that I definitely, you know, was saying before is that what COVID-19 or coronavirus has done is accelerated a lot that was going to happen anyway. I think the other side of it is that I've got a firm belief, and I think you guys might share this, is that they're not going to go back. So, I mean, you know, once we've had a lot of people, the best example I can give you is I was talking to a professor at a university where he said, if you think about, you know, 12 months ago, if you said to a university professor, how long would it take for someone like the University of Queensland to move fully online? They'd say 4 to 5 years. The reality is that it took them 2 weeks. So I think a big chunk that it comes back to is that a lot of these changes that we're talking about, which were coming anyway, they've been accelerated, but they'll also probably hang around and last in the long term as well, because people will find that their efficiencies are better, that it is more worthwhile, allows them to do things at scale.
Yeah, Vu, I think it's an interesting point. I think, like, you know, we've obviously seen, or we're having a look at some of the stats recently around, like, say, the NASDAQ, which is one of the indices which is heavily sort of weighted towards technology, has sort of outperformed, you know, the general indices by, like, I think 13%, and is actually up on where it was, you know, earlier in the year before sort of, you know, there was a crash, showing, I guess, the enablement that technology is really enabling a lot of industries at this time. Like, Tom, for instance, you know, universities, as you said, like, partially or fully shut down at this point, yet corporates still need to hire grads for next year. So, you know, maybe you've seen some pretty amazing numbers on your platform of students signing up, you know, trying to get the virtual internship exposure. You know, you've also seen, you know, I guess a quick change in the way corporates are trying to engage with the future grads. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you felt it over the last couple of months?
Yeah, so I guess the best way to show you what that change looks like is giving you actual figures. So on the student side, in February, we had 22,000 new enrollments across our courses. In May, which is obviously just concluded, we had 142,000 new student enrollments. So that gives you a sense. Last month was 100,000. Yeah, so, you know, and, you know, we kind of expect, we're even seeing right now that that's accelerating even further. So, you know, by the end of this month, we would kind of expect to see between 175 and 225,000 new student enrollments, which is a scale that we've never really dealt with until now. Then on the company side, you know, obviously the kind of best measure is like looking at revenue growth. We historically have grown our annual run rate 18% month on month since we started. But in April, we saw 30%, 31% growth in our run rate. Last month, we saw 28% growth in our run rate. And that comes to the demand side, so the company side. And it really goes back to what I was saying earlier, which was companies don't have a choice but to use tools such as ours now when it comes to engaging prospective talent. And, interestingly, I guess there's been a perception, oh, InsideSherpa, you're in recruiting, you're in HR, there's hiring freezes, that must be tough on your business. And while there are broad headwinds in the hiring market, I think you need to, we're fortunate that we sit, we believe we sit at that new frontier of how recruitment's going to work, which is, entirely online. The days of KPMG sending 350 campus recruiters to 300 different schools here in the US, going to what Vu's point was earlier, they're not going to go back to that, because the sheer cost and logistical nightmare of doing that operation is just not worth the upside of, us delivering the same results through entirely online means. So yeah, right now we're seeing that companies are kind of scrambling to use tools such as ours, and we don't expect that. Of course, physical recruitment will always have, will always exist in some permutation, but I think we are going to see that acceleration towards tools such as the 3 products that are sitting on here today, yeah, that's definitely presented significant opportunity for us, but also significant challenges as we look to kind of scale our customer support, scale our onboarding process, scale our support with students while we're dealing with numbers that we've just never had to deal with before.
Yeah, it's super interesting, because I think someone was referring it to almost like the coronavirus debt. It's whether it's going to be interest free or not, in terms of you get a ramp of numbers, everyone's scrambling to try and get a solution. And then it's how much of that debt we have to pay back over time. Well, as in will there be a baseline that goes up significantly now? So people have now seen, how InsideSherpa or GO1, etc. will, benefit them go over time. All right. That's really good. I think Vu, I'd like to shift a little bit onto one of the things that I think has been pretty interesting that you guys have been working on with the airline industry, and how you've been, supporting corporates, I would say, during this time, and sort of some of the innovation that you've seen or agility that you've seen from some of your customers. So I'd love to hear a couple of examples that I know you guys have worked on, which have been really, really interesting.
Yeah, I think, if I can kind of preface it with anyone who's on this call who's from the HR or L&D or anything in terms of workforce management, your job's really hard at the moment. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because you've got to think all of this change is occurring on the workforce, whether it be redundancies, whether it be restructuring, whether it be hiring new people to cover new roles, whether it be supporting people to work from home. So I just wanted to start off by saying, look, if you're in the HR space, we feel for you, because it's a hard job, and it's made even harder now. So all the tools that we're talking about today, Vervoe, InsideSherpa, and GO1, it's all about how do we bring about more efficiency to the process, which is, I think, that acceleration we're talking about, so that you as a HR or L&D manager actually have more time to do the things that you need to get done. And I think that's one of the underlying sort of principles that we have, is sitting there going, how do we enable HR and L&D managers or the workforce planning or management side of a business to actually use technology, which we're all using right now on this Zoom call, to actually give themselves more time to do the things they want to be doing. That's from a HR perspective. But Stu, to what you were talking about before, one of the earliest companies to talk about stand downs and furloughs was actually Qantas here in Australia. And I think they mentioned it way back in February. So that, this is very much ahead of everything else that happened in March and subsequently from there. So early on, we actually spoke to Qantas and we said, look, we've got a library of 70 to 80,000 courses. You've got a whole bunch of staff who physically won't be able to do what they normally do every single day, and you're standing them down. We want to set up an academy for you to be able to provide it to your staff to allow them to undertake training. And we did that for Virgin as well. And we've done that for quite a few other businesses. So typically organizations view training as, I go in, I tick the box, I do compliance training, I've got to do whatever I need to do for my role, tick and flick, and I'm out. And we wanted to use this as an opportunity to say, guys, you've got a whole bunch of people here. And the concept that we've been talking about over the last few months is that concept of earn or learn. That idea that if we can't be productive in what we're doing in our day-to-day jobs, if I'm normally sitting there on the tarmac and unloading bags and there's no bags to unload, what can I do to continue some form of productivity, right? And so we're really pushing that idea of earn or learn, and it's been embraced massively. So in with the airlines, you know, we're getting thousands of airline employees self-register. So this is a different form of learning. Normally we'd go to a company, provide them with the learning, they'd put it in their system and they'd assign it to their staff. But what we did was we said, hey, let's try a different model. We're actually giving staff the opportunity to self-register and do their own learning. And how do we reposition learning in your organization as a perk? How do we position it as a benefit? And give them the opportunity to actually build up that curiosity and that desire to learn within their organization. And I can tell you, every single week we send these stats back to the airlines, to their executive team, and they are having, like, you know, the engagement is several fold higher. Like, I'm not talking, you know, as Omer was talking about before, it's not 20, 30%, you're talking about a few 100%. The flip side of it is that we're also, because you're giving employees choice and you're saying, here's a massive library of courses, you go in there and find what you want to do and learn from it. We're providing them insights on what their staff want to learn that they never knew before. And so, you know, I think it was Churchill who said, never waste a good crisis. They're using this as an opportunity to learn more about their staff. In Singapore, on Good Friday, we launched a project where, with the Singaporean government, to provide free training to Singaporean workers. In the space of 4 weeks, we had 70,000 workers enroll and do about 10 or 11 million minutes of learning, which doesn't sound like that much, but that's quite significant. And that's about 2.5% of Singapore's working population signed up in that sort of 4-week period, and the numbers keep growing by the day. So I guess the key thing I want to come back here is that we're seeing our demand increase globally because I think it's something that learning is something that needs to keep happening. You can't stop doing it. But they're also seeing that as an opportunity. Organizations are seeing that as an opportunity to keep their staff productive if they can't do their frontline jobs. The last thing I'd throw out there is the best example I can give you is Italy has never been in our top 10 countries of consumption of GO1. During March with lockdowns, we saw Italy become our 4th highest consumer of GoOne content globally. So, you know, that concept of earn or learn, that concept of, what was it, lockdown learning, someone told me the other day, or ISO learn, I think it's something that is going to be very important. But Stu, to your question of kind of, is it here to stay? I think that organizations will view learning differently. And I think that a big chunk of that legacy will be here to stay.
Yeah, really interesting. I really like the earn or learn concept. And obviously there's almost the have and have nots. There's folks that have still got jobs. There's also a lot that have been sort of unemployed at this time. And that's also coming to your point, Omer, which would be good for you to comment on, is how are companies kind of dealing with, you know, the higher volume of applicants coming through? You know, as you said, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts of how that's changed and like the volumes that you're seeing per role. You know, there's areas like healthcare or aged care, supply chain, you know, e-commerce, things like that are all, you know, going kind of gangbusters at this point. So keen to hear your thoughts on it and how people are changing, especially in a remote first world of hiring.
Yeah, I think some companies were already on that path and understood that that's an issue, and this has just accelerated that. So companies like Walmart, where you know the volume of applicants it's actually hard to comprehend the numbers. Everything you just sort of add zeros. But what's actually happened is that companies in industries where this wasn't an issue, and they're slow to adopt technology, like healthcare and aged care, for example, industries that we actually tried to avoid because you know, the sort of legacy systems, not early adopting in their sort of mentality, and haven't even sort of recognized these categories and allocated budgets, and, you know, not sort of the easiest place to sell into. All of a sudden they've come to us and said, we need to be live in a week. You know, we've got, you know, 5,000 applicants for our telehealth role or for our mental health counseling role or nursing or whatever. And these are essential workers and they're in demand. And these companies have had to think very differently about, but basically the process that they knew and trusted is no longer possible. And the candidate volume is, you know, 5 or 10 times higher all of a sudden. And they have to get people deployed, and it's a very real imperative. They have to get them in the roles, you know, within a week. And so what that's done is it's forced these companies to think very differently about efficiency. And they're not even talking about the sort of quality of hire, which which is obviously a benefit that comes as well. But it's just about how do we actually do this really, really quickly. And so we basically had to sort of replace their entire processes very quickly with our process. And, you know, some of these companies I really admire, because just think about the cultural and mindset shift for a health insurance or for an aged care company, okay, to sort of think about, you know, they've now got to tell an executive or their CEO that they're spending money on technology like ours. I mean, they didn't even have the language to describe it previously. You know, it's like you're buying a new car and you think about buying something that's a bit more fuel efficient, and then someone says to you, actually, why don't you buy a Tesla? And you sort of, what? Hang on, now I've got to have, like, you know, charging station at my house. What's going on? It's like a totally different universe. And these companies have had to deal with this very real situation. And so, you know, for us, it's been amazing to be able to do it and help them, but also kind of learn from them about, well, how are they thinking through this whole process. And it's been a really proud moment. You know, we've placed 150 mental health counsellors at Beyond Blue through Medibank, and, you know, we've worked through sort of a bunch of aged care roles and telehealth and counselling roles and nursing and things that we didn't imagine we'd be doing. And it's amazing. We feel like we're contributing directly to some of what's going on right now, and it's a really good feeling. And I really admire these companies.
Yeah, it's really good. And on the flip side, so there's the earn or learn piece. Like, I guess there's a lot of people kind of affected by unemployment, you know, at this point in time. Like, have you guys got any thoughts? Maybe Tom can answer. First up is, like, to improve your chances of sort of job opportunities. I know you got, you know, obviously you've got virtual internships as an offering. Keen to kind of hear your thoughts on how to actually skill up. And I know, Vu, you know, with GO1 with training, but keen to hear from Tom, like, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's hard, right? Like,
yeah.
You know, the supply of opportunities is significantly less than what it was for, you know, especially with students, than it was 6 months ago. So it's really hard to, I guess, escape that fundamental fact. But to your point, Stu, of course, I guess, like, one of the benefits of, you know, living in a tech-enabled world is that learning for the most part and upskilling for the most part is far more accessible from the comfort of your home, and it's far cheaper than what, you know, traditional credentialing systems such as universities, you know, have looked like. And so, for example, at InsideSherpa, all our courses are entirely free and open access to students. So there's no barriers to students enrolling in the programs. In actual fact, like, any one of you can go off and enroll in our courses, but there's nothing stopping you from doing that. But yeah, I mean, with the employers that we currently work with, for them at an entry level, and I can only really speak with conviction at an entry level, is they're looking for intent. Right? Like, the number one characteristic that they're really looking for in their candidates is, like, does this student really want to work here? And are they giving me signals? Are they kind of demonstrating, you know, the right types of things to say that this is what I want to do? And I've, like, proactively kind of, you know, upskilled and, you know, got myself in a position that I can hit the ground running when I walk into this organization. And our programs are one way to do that, but there's, you know, like, there are so many different ways that students can upskill. You know, whether it's with us, whether it's, like, more kind of using, like, Coursera or Udacity or Udemy or, you know, LinkedIn Learning. There are so many, just even, like, students that are at university. Typically, universities have partnerships with platforms such as ours and Coursera, where they can get access to this type of learning content. But, like, yeah, in a very challenging environment, like, the imperative is for students to continue to build experience which demonstrates, like, intent, and that would be, you know, at a very simple level, like, any advice to students out there.
That's really good. Awesome. Well, I might actually take that as a shift of gears and start talking a little bit around, like, your own entrepreneurial journeys, you know, managing your own businesses. And one of the questions that's actually come through is from Jacob. So thanks for the question, mate. Is that if you were starting your own business now, what would you be leveraging and what would you be wary of? And so I guess, you know, it's an interesting environment, but that is another option available to people, is like, you know, if they don't, you know, I guess looking forward, it's like, is it a good time to start a company, and what would what would your advice be to them?
You want me to have a go?
Go for it, mate. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's always a good time to start a company. I think there's only really one question. There are two questions. One, the main question is, are you solving a real problem, right? Is it a problem that needs a solution? And the second is, on a personal level, are you motivated enough to do it? You know, do you want it badly enough? And I think you want to build a business that's enduring, that is successful in any market. The only difference now, in my opinion, is that capitals, it's a little bit different in terms of access to capital. Market conditions are what they are. And most businesses, when they start, they're not trying to solve a problem. The addressable market is not planet Earth. It's a pocket of planet Earth. And so, you know, there are plenty of markets and parts of industries that are functioning very strongly right now. So that gives you enough scope to test your hypothesis and figure out if your business is real, if it solves a real problem for customers. And you can do that everywhere in the world now, even though people are kind of distracted. But you need to think about, you know, it might be just a little bit harder or take a little bit longer, or the goalpost might have moved a little bit in terms of what it's like to raise pre-seed. Having said that, when you're trying to raise capital at sort of the pre-seed or seed level, we're not talking about extraordinary amounts. And so, you know, that sort of capital is available. And at the end of the day, people still want to back a winner. And if what you're doing is extraordinary, then people will get behind it, even in tough economic conditions. So, you know, it's always a good time to start a business.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Anyone else want to comment? Go for it, Tom.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, I don't think there's been a better time to start a business. I mean, if you think, like, the world is fundamentally very different today than what it was 6 months ago. And I think most of us can agree that the world isn't going to go back, you know, to what it looked like 6 months ago. And so if you accept that premise, that presents so much opportunity, because, like, we're all operating in a completely different paradigm. And the current, you know, the old way of doing things might not always make sense in this new world. And because of that context, there are just, like, so many opportunities out there. Like, we've seen on the front line, like, I wish I could kind of clone myself like 5 different times with our corporate customers, because, like, we're seeing them struggle, not just in recruiting, like, we're seeing them struggle in so many different ways as they try and adapt to this new world. And they know that this new world is going to, like, continue on in one form or another. So I think there's never been a better time. And on the capital piece, like, you know, that is obviously a consideration, but ultimately, you know, I think for the most part, venture is sitting on, like, a record amount of powder around the world.
Yeah.
And they've got to deploy it. And if you're building something that is super valuable and people are paying you a lot of money to use, then, like, the capital will follow. Like, good companies, even in downturns, always get funded. And yeah, I wouldn't be turned off by there are obviously extra complexities to raising capital in the current conditions, such as, like, it's really hard to meet people. Whereas, you know, it's obviously easier 6 months ago to do that. But yeah, I would kind of say, like, if anyone's thinking about building a business and you've thought through the considerations that Omer said earlier, like, are you solving a real problem? Are you motivated enough to do it? Like, there is not a better time than right now to go and do it.
Stu, if I can add to that, mate. I definitely share the views of Tom and Omer in terms of being bullish about starting a business at these times, right? I mean, obviously everyone has to weigh up what's right for them and make sure, as Omer was pointing out, that you've got the conviction to do it. I noticed this question comes from Jacob Bamford. Full disclosure, and this was not coordinated, Jacob actually used to work for GO1. And Jacob recently left GO1 to start his own business with our full blessing. And that was because he was super keen to get out there and start his own thing. And I think that's the important thing that it comes back to, is going, if you've got that conviction to be able to do that in the times that exist right now, and if you're able to be successful right now when it is difficult, as you come out the other end, as the world comes out the other end, if and when that is, you're going to be a better business for it. You know, this is a great way to be able to actually qualify whether or not you're able to survive in some of the most challenging economic times that we've ever probably had in our lifetimes. The second part that I'd throw out there is, you know, we're a company that's taken on lots of investment, and I think we all have. But I think one of the things that it comes back to for me, and this is anyone who's starting out, is the best form of investment is revenue. So if you can build a cash flow positive business right now that is growing in these conditions, you know, that powder, you can take it all later on if you do choose to do it. There are some companies here in Brisbane that are as big as GO1 is and haven't raised a single cent, right? And I think that's really, really important to understand, is that, you know, and forgive me for saying this, Stu, because we are on a TLI call, but if you can do this without raising any money and grow a business, go for gold. Revenue is the best form of investment. And I definitely want to say that to everyone. I can also see there's Lee Walker Roberts on the call. So I'm just looking at the list here. Lee is one of the best advisors around for entrepreneurs that you can see in South Australia. So I think the other bit of it is make sure that you talk to people who have been there and done that. Andrew and I met Steve Baxter years ago, well before he was on Shark Tank, purely just to understand, are we on the right track? What are we doing and how would he do it? So my 2 cents that I'd throw out there is also, before you kind of dive in the deep end, get some advice, get some counsel, you know, do a sanity check on what you want to do with someone who might have been there and done that. So definitely would throw that out there too.
Yeah, that's really good. And I completely echo your points. Like, you know, even investors value revenue. Like if you don't need to raise the capital, you know, that's a fantastic position to be in. So 100% agree. We're actually getting a couple of questions just around how you sell during this time. So then, you know, like, as you said, like revenue is the number one thing, but you know, you can't go and have meetings and, you know, jump to a boardroom. I think all of you folks sell to enterprise, so to large corporates. And so keen to hear how you've had to adjust to that and actually how you actually close deals.
I can speak to that first. Well, we love that, you know, our sales are predominantly inside sales, remote sales. I think the world was pretty well set up. I mean, it depends on the business, but the world was pretty well set up beforehand to do enterprise sales remotely. It obviously depends, I guess, like what price point you're coming into, who's your ultimate economic buyer. But, you know, 90% of our sales pre-COVID were happening through inside sales regardless. Now it's obviously 100%. But it's great from a unit economics perspective, right? Like building a business on the back of inside sales is it makes far more sense. It's far more capital efficient than you know, having to kind of physically like attend, you know, travel, physically pitch. The one caveat is that we find that there are a few more logistical barriers that you need to overcome in the sales process that you might not previously had to deal with, particularly around like just companies making decisions, right? Like companies that we work with, which are, you know, typically like large, big professional service firms, their decision-making process is usually like internally in person, right? They all get together, they make a decision, they chat about it. Now in the current world where you've got like screaming kids, like dogs in the background, trying to like set up different times, like it just logistically like does take a little bit more time for them to reach a decision. But I think for the most part, if large companies are adapting as quick as they are, I think most companies are probably adapting in the SME world. And yeah, as I said, like if you're building a product which companies really want and they desperately need, it doesn't really matter how you sell it, they're going to buy it. And that's certainly what we've kind of experienced over the last month or two. Yeah,
that's really good. Yeah. You touched on a point there. So it's not all, you know, amazing times out there, especially if, you know, running your own business is difficult. So what's been like the hardest things that you guys have had to kind of like navigate through for yourselves? Is it around team? Is it around, you know, working with customers? Like what's been the most stressful part of your job?
I can throw it out there. I think, you know, as well geared as I think we were going into this in terms of, you know, like what Tom was talking about, having an inside sales team, being able to sell remotely, being able to have teams already have the infrastructure in place to be managed remotely. I think one of the biggest challenges is that you don't have those incidental, and at least for us as a pretty large team with offices in different places, you don't have that incidental engagement with people that you previously would have. Like, I would probably talk to 30 people in our team a day, just incidentally walking past them in the hallway, sitting out front for a coffee, them pulling me up and asking me a question. And you lose that very, very quickly when you don't have the physical environment. And it's something that we're still trying to figure out how to compensate for. Because I think there are lost minutes and hours of personal engagement, particularly for myself as a founder with our team, that's not happening right now. And that's a challenge, because it means that I have to work harder to try and get down to that sort of understand what's happening across different places and give people the opportunity to do that. We still have a Friday call where everyone in the world jumps onto it. Unfortunately, for some people in the US, like Tom, it'll be a Thursday evening call. But the flip side of it for me is that I think the thing that I'm still personally trying to, and I know that my fellow co-founders are, is how do we compensate for some of that stuff that's lost in terms of that incidental engagement? I don't think it's impacted culture per se, but I think it does slow down the progress of what you're trying to build in terms of the non-structural components of your business, if that makes sense from a workforce point of view. Don't have an answer yet, but it's something that we're working on.
No, so you're still doing all hands, which is good. So
all hands is incredibly powerful. If you're not doing an all hands, please do, particularly at these times, and make sure everyone's there's nothing better. At the end of the month, we do a DJ set. I'm not joking. That is streamed via Twitch, where you have 150 GO1 staff members, and you'd be surprised how many closet DJs there are in a company who actually have their wheels of steel sitting there in their living room, and they're sitting there DJing with a Twitch stream on live, and everyone sits there for a full hour on a Friday afternoon having a beer together, watching it live. We're just trying to think of different ways to be able to engage people.
Yeah, 100%. You guys, Tom, Omer, got any comments on how to engage and keep culture up, things like that?
Not just an observation, not so much advice. I mean, less than half our company, or less than half our team is in Australia, and so we've had to be really conscious that countries have sort of gone through the pandemic at different rates, different paces, and been impacted in different ways. Also, governments have responded very differently, and at one point we were sort of like, things were like starting here. The US was already a disaster. Then in Ukraine, it was like as if nothing had happened. The government was pretended there was no issue at all. And so, we had people on our team in sort of very real fear for their sort of health and jobs. And then other people in the company were kind of like, why are we even talking about costs? What's the issue here? Like, what's going on? Why is this even a thing? And so we've had to constantly think about, and obviously now in the US, there's rioting and some very real social issues and racial issues. And so, we're constantly having to think about, well, people are going through different things depending on where they live. It's not homogenous. So it's not like we can get everyone in a room and say, okay, this is what's happening. Well, it's not uniform. And so the challenge for us has been trying to get everyone on the same page to understand that, this is actually how the company has been impacted, even though you might not feel that in your little pocket of the world, and your market might be reacting differently. You've got markets where unemployment, if you're in the valley, then probably, 1 in 3 or 1 in 2 people, has taken a pay cut or lost their job in tech. But in other markets, you're not feeling that at all. And so really getting everyone on the same page, understanding how real this issue is, but at the same time, not kind of scaring the crap out of everyone and keeping people in high spirits. And that's the balance I'm constantly trying to strike. And it's not easy.
Yeah, 100%. Tom, any views on what's been challenging for you to try and manage the team? I know you have folks, in Australia, and you're based in the US, and so you've already been partly remote anyway.
Yeah, we're distributed. So we've got team members in Perth, Melbourne, Sydney, San Francisco, New York, and London. So the kind of challenges that Vu raised are same challenges that we raise, although we are obviously a far smaller team. I think the most practical thing, and I don't have an answer to this either, is the boundary between work and home. And obviously as a founder, like, you kind of like, it is your life, like you kind of absorb that fact and that's normal. But I'm also very conscious about the toll that it has on our team, because it's not as simple as like, okay, I can pack up for the day, I can go home, I can, you know, enjoy time with my partner, I can walk our dog, I can go for like those normal things where there are the normal lines of separation where people recharge. Like that's where people recharge, refresh, get their energy, come back to work the next day. Whereas in the current environment, we don't see that. Like it's you're always connected to work because your laptop's already always in front of you, people are always online, and so those lines have become significantly more blurry. Throw in the extra demand for our particular product, and I'm sure if I measured it, people are spending you know, a couple of hours extra per day working than what they would have. And so the challenge for me as a manager is, you know, how do you manage that? How do you mitigate that? How do you make sure that people aren't burning out and you know, are feeling refreshed and ready to go? So, I mean, I don't have the answer to that. We're obviously experimenting with a few different things at the moment, but that is certainly like one of the biggest challenges that we've probably faced in this new world.
Yeah, it seems like relatively consistent. It's like everyone's sort of, you know, a lot of working from home and trying to navigate through it. I mean, we have the same problem. It's like I'm on my laptop at 9 o'clock at night when I shouldn't be, but just because like I walk from the office to the living room and just sit there and keep going kind of thing. So yeah, it's not having that sort of delineation, which is good. So I guess has it changed your view? I know, Vu, you're sitting in your amazing offices there with no one in it. Has it changed your view in terms of where you want to source and hire staff going forward? Like, do you think distributed? You know, I know like Twitter basically announced that they're going fully sort of remote forever to all of their staff, etc. And there's been, you know, other major players kind of making the same announcements. Do you think that that's going to be a shift that continues, or do you think it's like, you know, as soon as you can and are able to, that the doors will open and back to sort of general office culture, even though you have work teams distributed around the world as you do, you know?
So I can give you guys an insight. We actually did one of the most comprehensive surveys of our team that we've probably ever done. Finished about 2 weeks ago around the impact of COVID-19 and the impact on people's work and working from home. And it provided some really interesting insights. It was literally 50-50 in terms of people who wanted to come back to the office versus people who wanted to work from home forever. So one of the things that I would come back to is that we're going, as an employer, and I think as a lot of people on this call will have to do, whether you are an employee, whether you're in HR, or whether you run a business, you're going to have to take into account the new demands of staff or the new expectations of staff. So whether you're hiring new people and what their expectations will be, or whether you're bringing people back to the office. And so the reality of it for us is that, you know, we've got 10 offices globally. Those offices are probably going to be at half capacity. But the flip side of it is, because of physical distancing rules, they'll probably be full, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. You know, we've got the office that I'm in here right now has about 90 desks, and they're all 1.5 meters wide. So literally 45 of those desks will not be utilized for us to be able to maintain, you know, proper physical distancing rules. But and this is just the beauty of it, 50% of the people won't be coming in as well. So, yeah. So for us, net change in space and net utilization of space in terms of capacity will probably remain the same based on people's expectations and demands. But to, you know, Tom's point earlier and your point earlier around just being able to, the reason why I'm in the office is I found myself as a founder, and Tom was pointing this out, you never switch off as a founder. But I found myself sitting there from dusk till dawn and vice versa, right? And dawn till dusk, because it's so easy to just keep powering through. And that's not healthy. I've got a young child. Stu, you've got a young child as well. It's important to have that delineation between home and office, or home and work. And so one of the most important things that we did was, you know, half the chairs in this office are missing. Half the chairs in this office have been borrowed, because what we've said to staff is your dining table is not your office. If you need a chair, come to the office and grab a chair. If you need a desk, we'll source one for you, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to carve out that little bit of office for yourself. You can't have it as your dining table, or else you'll be sitting there at your dining table all day and you won't have a home. So for me, at the end of the day, I don't think our offices will change too much in terms of our footprint, but I think the way we utilize them will definitely change. The other side of it, though, is some of our offices, say in the UK, we'll actually be going completely remotely, because the breakdown between our workforces in terms of people who wanted to have an office and people who didn't varied by region, but also varied based on role as well. So if you talk to the Australian sales teams, they want to be in the office because they thrive off that energy. If you talk about our developers, they're happy to keep working remotely anyway, because it's no difference to them keeping on their noise cancelling earphones. So I'd throw it out there that, if you do have a team, or if you do have a small team, or if you're looking at the expectations of people you're hiring, I think that space is still going to play an important role. It's just going to be utilized differently.
Yeah, really good. Awesome. Conscious we've got a little bit of time left. So if anyone got a final question, please ask away, but I've been asking your questions along the way. Maybe we'll end off on a positive note. So what are you guys excited about, looking forward with the outlook? Keen to just go and do a quick wrap from everybody. That'll be great. Who wants to kick off? Omer, I'm picking on you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I mean, on a personal level, I'm encouraged by how resilient our team has been. And, we keep hearing these cliches, extraordinary times, but this is just the real world. And we haven't had a deep recession or deep or sort of hugely disruptive situation like this in quite some time, in about a decade. But every once in a while, if you've lived long enough, you know that every once in a while these things happen. Yeah. What's been interesting here is that it's happened to the entire world at the same time with this pandemic. There's a lot of good as well. We've seen some interesting behaviors, some acts of goodwill. We've seen people come together. We've seen resilience, and I've seen that in my team as well. And you kind of think, okay, well, if we can get through this, we can get through anything. And it comes back to the question earlier around, well, is it a good time to start a company? If you can start a company now and you can survive through these kind of times, well, you're going to be pretty well placed in any market conditions. So I'm naturally optimistic. At the same time, I'm realistic, and I'm always trying to make sure that we survive and don't run out of money and all the obvious things when you're running a business. But I'm programmed to be optimistic. I think most founders are. You like to think that you're going to conquer the world. This hasn't changed my view at all. In fact, and we touched on some of these points, that this has accelerated some of the things that we've all been really wishing and hoping that would happen anyway, and they've happened faster. So the exciting thing is like, okay, how much of this is going to stay? How much faster? It would have taken us 10 years longer to get to the point that we've been able to get to now in terms of digital adoption and some of the changes in mindset. And that's exciting. And while everyone's shell-shocked, I don't think we've yet understood the full impact, because everyone's still shell-shocked now. They're homeschooling their kids, the budgets are being taken away. But, in 6 months or whatever it is, 12 months, whatever it is, when things calm down a little bit, I think we'll be able to understand that, the world's an exciting place. And I'm looking forward to that.
Really good. Tom, and then if you want to also chat, one of the questions come through is just asking about what your top tips are for recruiting and onboarding at this time. So you can weave it in.
So I guess the thing I'm most optimistic about is like when society faces like immense hardship and challenges, like often you see the best in people. You see the best in humanity, and that can work in a lot of different ways. So it can obviously work in terms of, looking for support or guidance from other people that you might respect if you're going out to start your own business. We've seen it operate in a really interesting way. So if you think about like what our product does, it's like a career resource for students. So about 80% of our kind of organic growth of our signups at the moment are coming through organic channels, which mean like non-paid marketing channels. And it really comes down to what we're seeing like on social media, in like Slack groups, in university forums, is that right now, like students are wanting to like share resources with one another more than ever, because everyone's facing like immensely challenging circumstances. And I think that's just fantastic to see that, you know, people are not just sticking in their lane and putting their head in the sand, and they're like more open to helping one another. And it becomes a very powerful force when you think about like mobilizing usage of a particular product, which is what we've seen in our growth. In terms of like top tips for recruiters when, what was it, when they're onboarding?
Just for hiring and onboarding staff at this point.
Yeah, so it kind of like picking up on what Vu said earlier, is just realize that it's hard, right? Like it's never been more important to find champions within your business to stay close to people who you might be onboarding remotely. This might not be as much of an issue in Australia anymore, but particularly in the US, we're seeing like, you know, onboarding of, so for example, my wife, who's in the room next to me, she's an attorney here at Google, and Google's very famous for their like induction and onboarding process. And my wife was asked, they've got a new team member starting, and she's been tasked with onboarding this new person and recreating the magic of the Google induction, which is obviously just like impossible to do when you know, you're sitting in your room. But the one thing which I think like Google or like you know, other companies do a really good job of is they find people within their organization who naturally are really good mentors, advisors. They stay super close to people and they kind of really like lift them up. And the worst thing you can do right now is like when someone joins your company is like pairing them with people within your organization who might not do that, might not stay close to them, might not give them support, because yeah, that kind of support, guidance, that white glove, high touch approach is so important in the context of like remote workforces than it is with like physical onboarding where you're actually coming into the office. And yeah, so that's probably my one piece of advice is like really think deeply about who in your organization great advisors and mentors, and mobilize them to help people to kind of pair them up with people who are joining companies.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Last one, Vu.
Yeah.
Might keep it short if you can, because I think we get cut off in about 2 minutes.
No worries. Look, my one key suggestion is if you're hiring right now, you're going to get more access to talent than you've ever had before because of the way the workforce is. So you can make sure you pick the right people right now if you're fortunate enough to be hiring. My biggest tip is don't hire for cultural fit, hire for cultural contribution. Someone who's going to enhance your company culture, not just conform to it. That's the first thing I'd throw out there. In terms of optimism, Stu, you've been with us when we tried to fit 12 people into a 3 square meter boardroom the first time. So we're incredibly bullish. We're incredibly optimistic about where things are going. What I've learned out of this is that I've got a stellar team, as Omer pointed out, that are incredibly resilient, that are battle hardened, and that'll be ready for whatever comes next. For me, in terms of what I'm looking forward to, it's really simple. I'm wearing my maroon GO1 t-shirt today because today would have been State of Origin 1. And at the end of the day, I look forward to being able to catch up with someone like yourself, Stu, and have a beer in person. But the other side of it is just simple things like being able to watch footy properly again. You know, those sorts of things. I think what's come out of this is actually that ability to have a greater sense of community. And we've had the opportunity to use these times to be able to determine what's important to us. So very, very bullish and very positive about where we're going.
Thanks so much, guys. Look, thank you so much, Vu, Tom, Omer. Really appreciate you giving up the time. You know, a couple of key learnings, like, well, great time to start a business, according to everyone. You know, see acceleration of tech adoption. So it's a good, you know, a good time for technology. A lot of resiliency and the best of humanity sort of coming out, you know, in terms of generosity and community was, you know, coming through, and really sort of focus on culture and making sure, you know, you're engaging your team and keeping them sort of, you know, aligned. So, thanks very much, folks. It was fantastic. Really appreciate it. You giving up your time early in the morning. And last shout out is just, we have launched 1013 recently. So go check it out. If you're looking to back early stage companies similar to these guys sitting in front of you, then join up with us at 1013 and we'd love to have you on board. So appreciate it. Have a great day, and hope you took some great insights from these folks who are running, you know, awesome businesses.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stu. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.